Sometimes, the stories that linger with us at Revenge Sins aren't the loud ones. They're the ones that arrive with a kind of quiet wrongness. Not grief yet, not anger, just a moment where the world keeps moving and something underneath it slips out of place. Elena Moore's story stayed with us because it began with a simple phone call that didn't sound like loss. It sounded like paperwork, like someone trying to close a door before anyone even stepped into the room. Elena is 33. She works in urban policy, the kind of job where you spend your days thinking about systems and safeguards and what happens when people fall through cracks. What happened to her father didn't start with a hospital monitor or a last goodbye. It started with a sentence delivered too cleanly, like it had been practiced. This is where she begins. I was already awake when my phone lit up. Seattle was doing that gray thing it does, rain tapping the window like it couldn't commit. My coffee was going cold on the counter because I'd gotten distracted by an email I didn't even care about. One of those mornings where you're moving, but you're not really present. Then I saw Ryan's name. We hadn't talked in a couple of weeks, not since the last visit to Rosewood, when he stood in the hallway outside Dad's room and told me to keep my voice down like I was the problem. I stared at the screen for a second too long before answering. Hey. There was a pause. Not the normal pause where someone's shifting the phone or walking into another room. This one felt deliberate. Elena. Dad passed last night. He said it like he was reading a line off a form. I didn't respond right away. My hand tightened around the phone so hard my knuckles started to ache. The coffee smell in the kitchen suddenly felt wrong, like I shouldn't be standing there with a mug when someone had just died. Passed. I managed. When did that happen? Overnight. They said it was peaceful. Another pause. Then his voice changed. Still calm, but sharper now. More organized. I've already talked to the facility. I'm handling the arrangements. I swallowed. My mouth was dry, like all the moisture had been pulled out of me at once. I was going to come down this weekend. I told him. I was literally looking at the calendar. I know. He didn't sound like he knew. He sounded like he wanted to move past it. And then, like he couldn't wait any longer. He added, also, just so you're not blindsided. Dad's will is clear. Everything goes to me. The accounts, the cabin situation, all of it. There's nothing set aside for you. I stared at the rain on the glass. I could see my own reflection faintly, holding the phone like it might burn. There was no softness in his voice. No space for the fact that our father was supposedly gone. You're telling me this right now. It's better to be direct. He exhaled, like I was exhausting him already, and I'm asking you not to complicate things. No lawyers, no drama. Dad didn't want that. I couldn't even find the right word. My brain kept snagging on one detail. You called me to tell me he died. I said, slowly, and the next thing you tell me is I get nothing. His tone tightened. Don't do this. I felt this strange, hollow pressure in my chest. Not a sob, not grief, something colder. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm standing in my kitchen, and you're talking like you just closed a deal. There was a beat where I could hear his breathing, controlled, patient, like he was waiting for me to calm down. Then I have to go. The line went dead. I stood there with the phone still to my ear, listening to nothing. My coffee mug sat untouched. The room was too quiet. Even with the rain, we don't usually step into the middle of someone's private shock, but in that moment, the silence after his hang-up felt louder than the call itself. I set the phone down carefully on the counter, like it was evidence. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just opened my contacts and stared at the number for Rosewood Assisted Living. Then I hit call. If this story stays with you, it helps to hear how it began for Elena, in her own words, from right there in that kitchen. By the time I hung up on Rosewood later that morning, my hands were shaking, but not in the way I expected. Not grief. Not yet. It felt more like the kind of adrenaline you get when you realize something important has been moved without your permission. I kept thinking about my father as he was before all of this. Thomas Moore didn't raise his voice much. He didn't have to. When he spoke, people adjusted themselves, shirts tucked in, chairs pushed back under tables. Order mattered to him. Not control. Order. Growing up, Ryan used to joke that Dad ran the house like a school hallway. No running. No excuses. Say what you mean. Do what you say. I was the one who pushed back more. Asked why. Left earlier. Ryan stayed close. He helped with errands, drove Dad to appointments, learned the rhythms of his days in a way I didn't. When Dad started forgetting small things, Ryan was the one who noticed first, or at least, the one who spoke up first. He just needs help managing paperwork, Ryan told me over the phone back then. Power of attorney. Temporary. It's not a big deal. I remember standing at my desk in Seattle, holding my badge in one hand. The cord twisted tight. I hesitated. Dad had always handled his own finances. He hated shortcuts. Are you sure he's okay with it? Ryan laughed. Quick and light? Elena, he asked me. He doesn't want you worrying from 3 hours away. I didn't argue. That part sits heavier than I like. A few weeks later, I visited Rosewood for the first time. Ryan met me in the parking lot. He looked tired, but also keyed up, like he'd been running on lists and deadlines for too long. Keep it light, he warned as we walked in. Don't confuse him. Dad was sitting by the window in his room. His posture was the same, straight-backed, hands folded. But when I said his name, his eyes didn't sharpen the way they used to. He smiled, slow and unfocused. Hey. I tried again. Softer. It's me. He nodded, polite, like I was a guest. Something in my chest tightened then, quiet and sharp. We notice, listening back, how that moment didn't explode. It just settled. The kind of moment that changes the air in a room without anyone naming it. Ryan hovered near the door, arms crossed. See, he gets overwhelmed. I wanted to argue. Instead, I sat down and talked about neutral things. Weather, traffic, anything that didn't demand too much from him. When we left, Ryan locked the door behind us and said, "This is what staying looks like." I drove back to my hotel feeling like I'd already failed a test I didn't know I was taking. After that visit, things moved fast in a way that didn't leave much room to question them. Ryan sent updates by text. Short ones. Dad was tired. Dad had a rough morning. They were adjusting medication. It always sounded temporary, like we were just getting over a bump. When I called, Dad answered sometimes. His voice was there, but it didn't land. He'd trail off mid-sentence, forget what we were talking about, then apologize like he'd done something rude. Sorry, he'd say, long day. That part bothered me. My father never apologized for existing. On my second visit to Rosewood, a nurse I hadn't met before stopped me at the desk. She checked her clipboard, then smiled like she was trying to be reassuring. He's resting more these days. She mentioned, we're keeping him comfortable. Comfortable was a word Ryan liked. 2. In Dad's room, the lights were dimmer than I remembered. His glasses sat on the table, folded, untouched. When I picked them up and handed them to him, he stared at them like they belonged to someone else. "These yours," I offered. He took them, turned them over in his hands, then set them back down without putting them on. "I'm fine," he said, a little too quickly. Ryan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Let's not push." I sat anyway. Told Dad about work, about a zoning meeting that ran long. He nodded in the right places, but his attention slid away, like it couldn't quite lock on to anything. When I stood to leave, I squeezed his shoulder. Muscle memory kicked in. For a split second, his hand closed over mine. Firm. Present. Then it loosened. We notice moments like that because they don't match the story everyone else is telling. They don't interrupt. They whisper. Back in the hallway, I asked Ryan how long this had been happening. He shrugged. "Couple months." Maybe more. That fast. His jaw tightened. This isn't linear. Elena. I didn't argue, not then. But in the elevator, watching the doors slide shut, I realized something didn't sit right. Decline happens. I knew that. I worked in systems built around it. This didn't feel like decline. It felt like someone had turned the volume down on him and told the rest of us to accept the silence. I was still in my apartment when Ryan's words finally caught up with me. Not emotionally. Logistically. He'd said Dad passed overnight. Peaceful. Handled. The kind of phrasing that closes things. But he hadn't said where, or who found him, or what time. That part kept knocking around in my head while I stood at the sink, rinsing out a mug I hadn't finished. I checked my phone again, half expecting another message. Nothing. I opened my contacts and scrolled until I found Rosewood Assisted Living. I told myself I was just confirming details. Dates, next steps, something neutral I could hold on to. A woman answered after a few rings. Her voice was steady, practiced. Rosewood, this is Karen. I gave her my name, gave Dad's. My voice sounded too normal, like I was calling about a billing question. There was a pause on the other end, paper shifting, a keyboard clicking. I'm sorry, she said carefully. Could you repeat that? My father, Thomas Moore. My brother called this morning and said he passed. Silence again. Longer this time. I don't have any record of that. She replied. He's still with us. I gripped the counter with my free hand. I'm sorry. I said, slower now. Are you sure? Yes, she answered. He's in the dining room right now. Breakfast just ended. The room tilted, not dramatically, just enough to make me lean my weight forward. So, he's alive. Yes, ma'am. I thanked her. Hung up. Stood there staring at the sink until the faucet started dripping again and I realized I'd never turned it all the way off. We hear this part and recognize the shift. It's the moment when shock gives way to focus. When disbelief stops being loud and starts being precise. I sat down on the edge of the couch and let the silence settle. Ryan hadn't been mistaken. He'd been deliberate. He'd told me Dad was gone so I would step back. So I wouldn't show up. So things could move without me. My phone buzzed then. A text from Ryan. Everything okay? I stared at the screen. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. I just called Rosewood. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. They must be behind on updates. He wrote. I'll check. Behind on updates. Like this was a calendar error. I set the phone face down and pressed my palms into my knees. I could feel my heartbeat there, steady, almost calm. That surprised me. What came next wasn't panic. It was clarity. The kind that doesn't shout, it just lines things up so you can't pretend you don't see them. I didn't know yet what Ryan was planning, or how far he'd gone. I only knew one thing. If I stayed quiet now, I'd be agreeing to whatever came next. I picked up my phone again and opened my email. Started a new message to a lawyer a colleague had recommended months ago for something unrelated. I'd never sent it then. I sent it now. And if you're still here with us, listening quietly, it helps to keep going from this point, because this is where Elena stopped waiting for answers and started looking for them. The lawyer replied that afternoon. His email was short, direct, a time, a phone number. I took the call from my kitchen table, notebook open, even though I didn't know yet what I'd write down. His voice was calm, the kind that doesn't rush you even when the subject matter does. Before we go any further, he said, I need to be clear. If your brother is misusing power of attorney, this isn't a family disagreement. It's a legal problem. I stared at the grain in the wood under my fingers. I'm not trying to punish him. I didn't say you were. He replied, I said we need facts. He asked about timing, when the power of attorney was signed, when Dad moved into Rosewood, when the medication changes started. I answered as carefully as I could, stopping when I wasn't sure instead of guessing. Give me a day. he said near the end. And don't confront him yet. That night, I barely slept. Not from fear, from the feeling that something was already in motion and I was behind it. The investigator called the next morning. Maya, her voice was steady, but not distant. She asked if I was somewhere private before she continued. I've reviewed your father's recent account activity, she said. There are some transfers you should know about. I held the phone closer. About $145,000 moved over a short period of time. Personal account to an account your brother controls. I closed my eyes. There's also the coastal cabin, she continued. It was sold for approximately $620,000 through a limited liability company. The buyer's name traces back to your brother. My throat tightened. Dad loved that place. Fixed things there himself. Refused help even when his hands shook. And the credit cards, she added. Several cash advances. I wrote the numbers out in words. Slowly, like if I rushed them, they'd fall apart. We hear the pause here. The kind that happens when information stops being abstract and starts touching something personal. I asked about the doctor. Maya hesitated just long enough to tell me she was choosing her words. The prescriptions were adjusted frequently, she said. No independent evaluation. It looks like your brother was pushing for comfort. Sedation. The physician didn't push back. I thought of Dad's unfocused smile. The glasses left unused on the table. Is that normal? It happens, she said. Not often, but it happens. After the call, I sat there for a long time with my notebook open and my pen uncapped, not moving. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't impatience. It was a pattern. Ryan called that evening. I watched his name ring out until it stopped. Then a text. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I typed back once. I'm making it accurate. No reply came after that. I closed the notebook and finally capped the pen. My hands weren't shaking anymore. That scared me more than if they had been, because somewhere between the phone calls and the numbers spelled out on the page, I stopped hoping this was a mistake and started preparing for what it actually was. I went back to Rosewood 2 days later. I didn't tell Ryan I was coming. I told myself it was because I didn't want to fight in a hallway again. The truth was simpler. I needed to see Dad before I saw him. He was in the same chair by the window, same posture, same folded hands. But when I walked in, his eyes followed me all the way across the room. Hey, I said quietly. His mouth twitched, like he was trying to decide whether to smile. He nodded once. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd seen in weeks. I pulled a chair closer and sat. Talked about nothing important. The ferry delays. A meeting that ran long. He listened, not drifting, just quiet. Ryan's voice came from behind me. You didn't tell me you were coming. I turned. He looked tired in a different way than before. Less frantic, more tight. I didn't know I needed permission. His jaw set. He glanced at Dad, then back at me. We should talk outside. In the hallway, the carpet muffled our steps. The place smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee that had been sitting too long. You called lawyers, he said, not accusing, certain. I called for information. That's the same thing to them. I kept my voice even. I know about the transfers, the cabin, the medication. He laughed under his breath. So that's what this is. That's what it is. He leaned back against the wall, crossed his arms. You don't get to judge this from 3 hours away. I'm not judging. I'm paying attention. You left. He shot back. I stayed. I drove him to appointments. I sat with him when he didn't know where he was. I handled things. Handling isn't the same as protecting. His eyes flashed. You think love pays the bills? You think being present on holidays counts for more than being here every day? The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, because they were practiced. We notice how certain phrases come out already shaped, like they've been waiting for the right moment. I took a breath. Dad trusted you with authority. That doesn't make his life yours to manage like an account. Ryan pushed off the wall. You want to take over now. Sweep in and feel better about yourself. That's not what I want. Then what do you want? I looked past him, back toward the room where Dad sat alone. I want him not erased. Silence stretched between us. Not dramatic. Just heavy. Ryan shook his head slowly. You don't understand what staying costs. I understand what it shouldn't cost, I said. He turned away first, walked back down the hall without another word. I stayed there a moment longer, leaning against the wall, feeling the weight of what I'd just stepped into. Not a misunderstanding, a belief system. When I went back into Dad's room, he was watching the door. His eyes met mine, clear, steady. I sat down again and held that look, knowing, without saying it out loud, that something was about to shift. I went back after 10 that night. The building felt different when the day staff was gone. Fewer voices, softer lights. The front desk was half asleep, a paper cup of coffee steaming beside a crossword. I signed in without looking up. Dad's door was closed. I knocked once. Light. The way you do when you don't want to announce yourself. From inside, his voice came back steady. Come in. That stopped me cold. I pushed the door open slowly. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, glasses on, shoes neatly lined up beneath the chair like he'd placed them there himself. He looked up and met my eyes without hesitation. Close it, he said. I did. For a second, neither of us moved. I could hear my own breathing. Too loud. You're awake, I said, stupidly. He gave a small nod. I've been awake. I sat down, the chair scraping the floor louder than it should have. My hands felt useless in my lap. You scared me, I told him. I know. His voice softened. I'm sorry about that. The apology landed heavier than anything else. He never apologized unless he meant it. I needed to see how far it would go. He continued. How much control your brother would take if I didn't push back. I shook my head, trying to catch up. They said you were declining. The meds, the notes. They helped with the act. He tapped the side of the bed. I leaned into confusion when it suited them. Stayed quiet when being quiet made things easier for him. My throat tightened. Why didn't you tell me? He looked down at his hands, still steady, because I needed to know who would protect me without expecting to inherit me. That sat between us, sharp and clear. I talked to a lawyer before I signed anything, he went on, moved most of what mattered into a trust, left just enough where it was to see what your brother would do. I closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them again, he was watching me carefully, like he didn't want to push too hard. I didn't want to be right about him. He said, I hoped I was wrong. We noticed the silence here, the kind that stretches not because there's nothing left to say, but because saying more might break something. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. He told me staying gave him the right. Dad let out a slow breath. Staying doesn't grant ownership. Authority doesn't mean erasure. He thinks he was protecting you. Dad's mouth tightened. He was managing me. The difference mattered to him. I could hear it in the way he said it. There was a knock at the door then, a soft one. Dad's eyes flicked up, alert but calm. Just a minute, he called out. The footsteps moved on. He looked back at me. This can't stay private much longer. I know. I don't want a scene. He added, I want the truth where it belongs. I nodded. My chest felt full, not with relief, but with a kind of grief that had nowhere to go. When I stood to leave, he reached out and caught my wrist. His grip was firm, familiar. You didn't leave, he said quietly. You chose differently. That matters. I held his hand for a moment longer than necessary. Then I let go and walked out, knowing the quiet was about to end and that he'd been watching the whole time. Ryan chose a small event room near the river, neutral walls, folding chairs, a table by the door with a framed photo of Dad from years ago, before his hair thinned, before everything narrowed down to paperwork and quiet rooms. Someone had set out coffee in cardboard cups that went cold untouched. People arrived in low voices, a couple of old neighbors, one of Ryan's business friends. No one looked at me for long. I sat in the second row and kept my hands folded, the way Dad used to. Ryan moved through the room like he was managing a schedule. A nod here, a hand on a shoulder there. He wore the suit Dad hated, the one Ryan insisted looked professional. When it was time, Ryan stood at the front. He cleared his throat once, then again. "Thank you for coming," he began. My father was a private man. He didn't want a fuss. That part was true. Almost. Ryan talked about responsibility, about being there, about stepping up when things get hard. He used words like care and protection, but they landed flat, like labels stuck on the wrong boxes. I felt the room leaning toward him, ready to accept the version he was offering. That was the moment Dad had warned me about, where truth gets crowded out by tone. I stood. The scrape of my chair sounded louder than it should have. Ryan's eyes flicked toward me, irritation flashing before he masked it. "Elena." Maybe I kept my voice steady. "You said Dad didn't want complications." A few heads turned. "I just want to ask one thing." I continued. "Where is he?" Silence spread, thin and fragile. Ryan smiled. Tight. "We talked about this. He wanted privacy." "That's not an answer." His jaw clenched. "Sit down." The door at the back of the room opened. Dad stepped in slowly, supported by a staff member from Rosewood. He wore his own jacket, the one with the worn elbow. His posture was straight. His eyes were clear. No one spoke. We've listened to a lot of moments like this, and there's always a beat where the room seems to forget how sound works. Dad let go of the staff member's arm and took a few steps forward on his own. "I'm right here," he said. Not loud, not angry, just present. Ryan stared at him like the floor had shifted. "This isn't funny," Ryan muttered. Dad shook his head once. It wasn't meant to be. He turned to the room. "I'm sorry for the confusion. I didn't intend for this to be public, but authority was used in my name that didn't belong there." Ryan stepped back, hands raised. "You're confused. You're tired." Dad's gaze didn't waver. "I trusted you with responsibility. You treated it like ownership." The words landed cleanly. No embellishment. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. Whatever argument he'd prepared didn't fit anymore. Dad looked at me then. Just a glance. A small nod. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. The room stayed quiet as people began to understand. Not all at once, but enough. Ryan didn't shout. He didn't storm out. He just stood there, shrinking, as the story he'd built slipped out of his hands. Dad turned toward the door. I followed, behind us. No one clapped, no one whispered. The quiet held. And for the first time since this started, that quiet didn't feel like erasure. It felt like space being returned. Things didn't resolve all at once. They never do. Paperwork followed. Meetings, quiet conversations that stayed behind closed doors. Ryan stopped calling. When we crossed paths later, it was brief, careful, like we were both aware of something fragile between us that neither of us knew how to carry anymore. Dad moved into a small place closer to me. Nothing fancy. A kitchen with a window that gets good light in the afternoon. He started cooking again, slow and deliberate, the way he always had. Some nights we ate together. Other nights we didn't. There was no pressure to make it mean more than it did. One evening, as I was leaving, he asked if I thought he'd gone too far. I thought about it for a moment. Then I told him the truth, that watching him stand up for himself had changed something in me. Not how I saw him, how I saw my own instincts, the part of me that hesitated less now, that trusted itself more. Later, alone in my apartment, I realized something else had shifted. I wasn't replaying the calls anymore, or the numbers, or the room by the river. Elena Moore didn't come out of this with a win or a loss. She came out steadier, clearer, more willing to stay present, even when staying felt uncomfortable. If you're still here, listening quietly, thank you for staying with her through it.